Welcome, everyone. Scouring the internet far and wide for a worthy adversary in the online materialism wars, I finally realized there was only one person who could defeat me. Me. I used to be a materialist. I was even shameless enough to admit this in public and make arguments for my views. Today, we're going to examine my very confused case for physicalism, originally posted on my blog in 2018. Of course, not every physicalist is as dumb about their case for physicalism as I was. I did not give the strongest case for physicalism, but in my defense, I was new to philosophy and made up for my lack of knowledge with a lot of confidence that I was right. So, with that in mind, let's see what my former self has to say in an episode I titled Science versus the Soul. Okay, so in order to keep things clear and differentiate between what I'm saying now and what I said back then, I'm going to refer to 2018 materialist Emerson as basically another person. And to keep things as neutral and dispassionate as possible, I'm going to refer to him as evil Emerson. Although it's important to remember that some physicalists are not evil, even though the vast majority of them are. So, as you will see, we're going to read this whole thing. Or I guess just we'll read it until it stops being fun. Here, let me put the comments up on the screen. The debunk is coming from inside the house. Oh, that's good. Elders. Let's try wide. Okay. Okay, yeah, science versus the soul. There are some real bangers in here. I believe I call dualists neuroscience deniers. I think I got that from Stephen Novella. But there's another post as well called The Argument from Consciousness that was written right before this. And, it's very similar in tone. But we're not going through that one today, but it's kind of embarrassing. I kind of have a confession to make. I think I might have been a type A physicalist. For real. Like I that was the vibe I was getting. I mean, I didn't know about those distinctions, like I was really new to philosophy in general. I was I started getting into apologetics and I started blogging about it like a year before this. So I slowly got more interested in philosophy and drifted away from apologetics. So this is very early, okay, but my type of physicalism was it seems like it was some kind of type A view. But like I said, it was a long time ago. I didn't really understand philosophy. Actually, in that spirit, not that I understand it now, but in that spirit, I wanted to read a passage from Michael Huemer from Knowledge, Reality, and Value. Studying philosophy helps you think better. I saw it happen to myself, and I've seen it happen to students over the years. I came to the subject at the beginning of college in a state of confusion, but I did not then comprehend how confused I was. I had some sort of thoughts about great philosophical questions, but these thoughts very often, as I now believe, simply made no sense. It was not that they were mistaken because I was missing some important piece of information. It's that I didn't really even know what I was thinking. I used words but didn't really know what I meant by them. I confused importantly different concepts with each other. I applied concepts to things that they logically cannot apply to. I might seemingly endorse a philosophical thesis at one moment, and in the next, a related but incompatible thesis without noticing any problem. So, yeah, I think that's true, and that's going to come into sharp focus as we're reading what Evil Emerson had to say about dualism and how it's in conflict with science. I was so proud of this title too, Science versus the Soul. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get going here. Do we have an immaterial soul, or are we just electrified meat? Awesome. Most arguments from consciousness advocate one form or another of dualism, which is basically the position that the mind is no more than or separate from the biological activity of the brain. The vast majority of Christians are substance dualists, and the vast majority of neuroscientists and philosophers of mind are not. I wouldn't say vast majority. Well, not dualists, yes. I'm so sneaky with this. Like there's some hedging here, and it makes what I'm saying technically true. There are a variety of opinions among, or sorry, what Evil Emerson said. There are a variety of opinions among secular philosophers of mind, but substance dualism is really only popular with religious people at this moment in history. So, I wouldn't say the vast majority of neuroscientists and philosophers of mind are materialists, but it is true to say that the vast majority are not dualists. It's like a fairly slim majority of philosophers of mind, and I don't think there's anything like the Phil Papers survey for like neuroscientists. Um, but yeah, saying it's really only popular with religious people is true, but that's not to say you have to be religious to be a dualist, you know. Okay. He continues, how does the soul violate science exactly? I think Christians don't often know what we mean when we say their beliefs violate scientific findings or trespass on the territory of science. Many religious people seem to think as long as they don't say the earth is 6,000 years old, then they're not science deniers. So I think it's important to lay out exactly what we mean if we want to say science conflicts with the conventional idea of the soul. Okay, so, here I'm just kind of setting it up. I don't know if it's necessary to read all this. Oh, no, there's a couple arguments here, I guess. Okay, on substance dualism, the mind can exist completely independently from the brain. On this view, we could reasonably expect at least some mental activity to have no neural correlate, meaning there's no reason to expect brain activity for every single mental event if our consciousness is not a product of the brain. But what we've found is there's no aspect of consciousness that doesn't have some physical correlate. There's no mental phenomenon that occurs when there's nothing going on in the brain. So like what, when you're dead? I mean, anyway, and this is like the main argument. This is Evil Emerson's main argument. As your physical brain changes through drugs, lack of sleep, or a chunk of it being removed, your mind changes. Even as you age, various mental abilities decline. No reliable observation or experiment has been able to separate the mind as a phenomenon from the brain. Yeah, keyword reliable there. Because, dualists do argue like this. Like we just talked about this in the terminal lucidity episode, where it's like, yeah, that seems like a problem for materialism because the brain is deteriorating and the mind is deteriorating in lockstep. And then at some point, it just kind of stops doing that. It's like all of a sudden you're back, like your mental faculties return despite the brain, still being in its state of deterioration from, whatever was causing it, oftentimes dementia, but not necessarily. So, that would be evidence against materialism, but I was actually kind of defending materialism in that episode. I don't think it's a great argument, but that's at least the right way to argue if you're a dualist, is to, or it's one way of arguing. Yeah, there's like spooky arguments like that. They're, not as solid in my mind compared to like the zombie argument or the knowledge argument, but I guess it's the right kind of approach. There's a fly in here. He's bothering me. He's a physicalist. Yeah, let's see here. Consciousness appears to be a product of the functioning of the brain. The mind is what the brain does, as neuroscientists like to put it. Is that how neuroscientists like to put it, or did you read on a blog one time someone say that and then you said neuroscientists like to put it this way? And all the evidence we have supports this idea. Okay, so I go on to quote Stephen Novella, who is host of the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, if you're not familiar with that podcast. That is pretty much where all of this comes from. Like, I was obsessively reading his blog at the time. I think it's called Neurologica. And he is actually like a pretty prominent character in my disillusionment with the skeptic community. A lot of times when I'm railing against the skeptic community, what I have in mind is that podcast and that guy in particular. And part of it is because like I read his blog pretty obsessively and he misled me on a lot of things. And this is one area. Some of this is my own confusion, but there are some things I say in this episode that are not true. And I just got it from him because I'm like, well, he's a neurologist at Yale. He would know. So anyway, in this passage, I don't know if it's necessary to read it. He just outlines a bunch of neural correlates with different things that we associate with consciousness. Like he says, damage or alteration to the brain can change your sexual identity, your moral decision making, your personality. He talks about synesthesia. There's like different sensory modalities mixing together. And there's evidence that there's like more robust activity between the relevant brain areas in synesthetes. He says that is a pretty compelling neural correlate. So again, like I said, this is basically my main argument, or Evil Emerson's main argument, that just the brain and the mind are correlated. And if two things are correlated, they must be identical. There are zero counterexamples to this principle. Like the moon and the tides are correlated, so they're identical. I think that follows straightforwardly. I don't even know what it would mean to say that the moon exists without the tides, I can't even conceptually separate these things. What would that even mean, But yeah, if two things are correlated, they're identical. If ice cream sales go up when the temperatures go up, then temperature is identical to ice cream sales. Tides just are the moon. I mean, what would it even mean for tides to exist independently of lunar behavior? It's not as dumb as I'm making it sound, like, honestly, but I'm just making the point that many things are correlated because they stand in some kind of causal relationship. It's not that A is identical to B, A causes B. And as you may have heard, correlation can exist without any causation at all. So there are a few possibilities here. If you see A and B going together all the time, you can have correlation but no causation of A and B. You can have causation between A and B. You could have identity of A and B, or constitution, or something like that. And that's super basic. It really is, but it's like there are multiple possibilities here. When you see A and B together, just because the mind and brain are correlated doesn't necessarily mean they're the same thing. So if you want to do justice, though, to like the physicalist line of reasoning, it's not just that A and B are correlated. It's like the intimate nature of the correlations. That's what the novella quote was about. So they're very intimate and they're fine-grained. And as Evil Emerson mentioned earlier, there's nothing about our mental lives that seems to be exempt from this. Okay, so the non-physicalist position, though, is not that the body doesn't do anything. Because like I said, I think Evil Emerson is being a little sneaky with some of the wording here. They are entirely separable. The mind can exist independently. On this view, we could reasonably expect at least some mental activity to have no neural correlate. So yes, on dualism, it is possible that like your body is like this marionette. It's just like, you could just do anything to the body and the mind stays exactly the same. That is totally conceivable on substance dualism, not on materialism. But that's not actually the dualist view. It's like, okay, this is possible on dualism, that things could have been this way. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But is that the dualist theory, that the body doesn't do anything? Like even back to Descartes, that's not the theory. That's not the dualist view. No dualist thinks the body's not doing anything, or that it's not like causally connected to the mind. So yeah, interactionist substance dualists will see the correlations as evidence of like a causal relationship. That's one way that you can interpret the correlations. It's a totally scientifically valid way of interpreting the correlations. And it's not that anything goes. It's just, these are two different views, saying that A and B are identical or something, and saying that they're causally related. Like, yeah, those will yield different expectations. But as far as we know right now, there's nothing to really strongly differentiate. Like, oh, well, this one is like scientifically defensible, and if you accept this other one, you're a science denier. You're a neuroscience denier. Like, that's going way beyond what you can say. I remember an ancient debate where Novella and Sean Carroll were on the same team. Yes, I remember that too. That was about NDEs, I think. 'Cause that was like an intelligence squared debate. Oh. Oh, man. Remember those? Are those still going on? I think it was about NDEs. I think, like, Raymond Moody was on the other side and maybe Eben Alexander. Not the two people I would choose, but yeah, I remember that too. I might have, played a clip from it because I also made an NDE episode, like, not long after this. That's one of the old ones that people still get mad about because people love NDEs, and if you are critical of them, they will freak out about it. Okay, so let's continue with what Evil Emerson has to say. Believers will often argue in response to data like these. Yeah, believers will often argue that correlation doesn't equal causation. I think just rational people in general will often argue that correlation doesn't equal causation. It doesn't follow that the brain states we're measuring are causing the mental states just because there's a correlation between mental activity and brain activity. Okay, so you can already see a hint of my confusion creeping in here, especially given what I just said a minute ago. Of course, they're completely right. Correlation is not sufficient by itself to establish a causal relationship. Correlation doesn't always equal causation, but sometimes it does. It's not sufficient by itself. That's why we need more than just correlation to think that there could be a causal relationship. And indeed, we have more than just the extremely robust correlation that's already been established. Okay, this is by far my favorite part of this episode. For one, brain states do not just correlate with mental states, they would seem to precede them, at least some of the time. Effects don't come before causes. At any rate, there are not any documented cases of mental activity preceding brain activity. Questionable. Changes to the brain always precede the corresponding changes to the mind, and this prediction of the materialist paradigm is perfectly replicable. It's always brain activity or changes to the brain first, and then the changes in mental state. We would not expect this temporal relationship if mind caused brain. It's the exact opposite of what you'd predict if we had a soul that was pulling the levers of our brain and body, interacting with the physical matter you're made of. Okay, let me see if I can continue this before I say something. Okay. Okay, so can any can any of you spot the problem with this passage here? Okay. I'm explicitly calling this a temporal relationship. Okay, easy thing out of the way first. The dualist view is not that only the mind causes the brain. This is not like a one-way interaction. Okay, it's a two-way interaction. So you would expect mental events to precede brain events sometimes, and you would expect brain events to precede mental events sometimes because you are an interactionist dualist. You know, you think there's a two-way causal interaction between these two things, your mind and your brain. Okay, so that's the easy point. The funniest part about this to me is that I'm saying that these things are not identical. Like, because I'm saying one causes the other. So if you assume that nothing can be the cause of itself, then I'm literally proving here that brain states and mental states are not identical. Okay, like I'm saying there's this temporal separation. First comes the brain event, then comes the mental event. They're separated by time. One is causing the other one. That's not materialism. And this is not in this passage, but I remember the first time I heard about epiphenomenalism, and I was just like awestruck because I was thinking, this is clearly true. Like everything that I've learned from the neurological blog has set me up for this glorious moment of realizing the truth of epiphenomenalism. But I didn't realize that that was not materialism. I thought that it was like, I'm like, oh yeah, materialism, materialist epiphenomenalism, of course. But like, if you're saying that one of these things has causal properties and the other one doesn't, and you're saying one comes at time t1 and the other one comes at t2, how are they identical? So like, this is a very, very confused argument from Evil Emerson. Yeah, so like, first of all, the fact cited is not as well established as I had believed at the time. As I said, I was mostly getting this from Stephen Novella's blog. The deeper problem is that even if it were true, it would not support materialism. If anything, it would support a more dualistic view. Because if neural events and mental events are separated by time, first comes one, then comes the other, then that rules out identity views or constitution views. Like if they're identical, we'd expect them to happen simultaneously, not one following the other. So if they're not occurring at the same time, how could they be identical? Like how could brain states constitute mental states if they're separated by time? And as this, it seems to be implied in this passage, like one has causal powers and the other one doesn't, although I didn't say that explicitly. So yeah, this is a very, very confused part of the episode here. Yeah, this is like what humor was talking about, where it's like you're just so confused and you don't even recognize your confusion. Like I wrote this out, I read it, I posted it. Everyone said, "Great job, Evil Emerson." Dualism debunked. Anyway, let's move along here. We don't know everything about consciousness, not by a long shot, but people tend to mistakenly equate not knowing everything with knowing nothing. This isn't just a Christian apologist thing, this is a broader problem. We don't know everything, but we actually know quite a lot, probably more than most people realize. I feel like literally the opposite is true. Like we do know quite a lot, but I think we know a lot less than people realize. Like this came up a lot in the terminal lucidity episode. This was like the defense. This was like one of the main defenses from Steven Pinker and from Michael Shermer and like the people who were arguing against Charles Murray and like Ralph Stefan Weir. You know, like the main point is like, look, you are seriously overestimating how much we know about neuroscience. That was like the best materialist defense against the terminal lucidity argument. Okay, so continuing along here. But one difference between scientists and Christian apologists is that scientists won't pretend to know something they don't know. They're not going to go around shooting their mouths off publicly without being relatively certain that they're correct. Whereas apologists happily take a gap in our knowledge on a subject they know little to nothing about and are content to make claims that no scientist would be comfortable making. Okay, I have a much lower opinion of scientists that I've developed in the intervening years, but just to be like charitable to Evil Emerson here, apologists are way worse. Like they will absolutely do this. They will absolutely talk about things they know nothing about. They don't know the first thing about, physics or neuroscience or whatever, and they will just, or epistemology or naturalism or atheism for that matter, and they will just like, or meta ethics, and they will just make these confident declarations. They've never read anything about it. They don't know anything about it, but they're like me. They're the reverse image of Evil Emerson. They're just like making up for their lack of knowledge with extreme confidence. Continuing along here. As I mentioned, we know quite a lot, and I've linked in the description a few science-based sources on the neurological basis of consciousness. I'm curious. I didn't actually look at my science-based sources that I linked at the bottom here. Oh, this is longer than I thought. We got to pick up the pace here. Okay, here are the excellent science-based sources. Stephen Novella's excellent blog. My, how the turntables. The Neuroscience of Consciousness, Anil Seth. Oh boy. And Anil, I don't know. Who cares? And Sam Harris on YouTube. Sam Harris is not really even a physicalist. Crash Course Philosophy. Crash Course is fine. I don't mean to. Oh, there's that. Yes, there it is. Stephen Novella and Sean Carroll, Intelligence Squared. Sean Carroll talking about his Swiss Army knife argument. Made an episode about that. See, like, what you people don't realize, what you freaking physicalists in my comments don't realize is that I literally was you. Like, it's you say things to me like I've never heard of them. Like you make these arguments for physicalism like I've just never come across. It's never come across my desk that the mind and the brain are correlated or something. Like you talk to me like I didn't used to be you. Anyway, but yeah, like so here's this causation and emergence, Sean Carroll. This is his I forget what you call it, like the core theory argument. Okay, I made a video about this like last year, I think. This was like a major part of my worldview, like what Sean Carroll talks about with like the core theory argument, how we know the physics underlying everyday life are totally known. And it's like that was a pretty essential part of my general worldview. And when I realized that argument didn't work, I told everybody about it. I was like, here's this thing I used to think was true. I'm going to make a completely decisive argument against it, which I did. And now I don't believe that anymore. And then you people are still coming at me with like, oh, did you know the mind and the brain are correlated? Yeah, I've heard of that. You're telling me for the first time. What does this mean? Would your views on oilicalism, would your views on physicalism? They would. Yes, they would. They would, Grace. Anyway, I got distracted by that. Sean Carroll talking about zombies. I bet that's a gem. Qualia Soup. Haven't heard that name in a long time. That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. The Interaction Problem by TMM. It used to be like the Messianic Maniac or something like that. And then a paper that I don't remember and probably didn't read. I did actually, I mean, I have read / watched all these videos, but that seems like a bit of a stretch. Mind-brain interaction and the violation of physical laws. Maybe I read it. I don't know. I just don't remember this name at all. And it seems like a little bit above the pay grade of Evil Emerson. Okay, yeah, there's more interesting stuff here. I guess we should continue along. But I was about to make an argument that's actually like not bad, so let's cover that first. Okay, crucially, they, I think meaning neuroscientists, are making steady progress on this naturalistic paradigm. If we were mistaken in our fundamental assumptions about neuroscience, you would expect researchers operating on a materialistic paradigm to be running up blind alleys, hitting brick walls, and generally frustrated with the lack of traction and progress in the neuroscience of consciousness. But rather, neuroscientists like Anil Seth are actively working and figuring out how the brain creates our conscious experience. Report that progress is moving along steadily and has been for years. So two things about that. First of all, that's actually not a bad argument to say like, okay, we have these fundamental assumptions, we're operating on a materialistic paradigm, and it's going well. It's going well. So, you know, if we were like flawed in these fundamental assumptions, sorry, Greg. I don't mean to make fun of you for misspelling everything, but would your views about physicalism and dualism and whatnot change if you decided Joseph Smith was a prophet of good? I am incompetent. Okay, I will stop making fun of you for the spelling errors. Okay, so if I became a Mormon, would that change my views about? Well, the thing is, Mormonism is a very materialistic religion. Like my Mormon philosophical friends are like way more materialist than I am, which is not to say that like your average Mormon in the pews is a materialist or would even know what that means. But like their first philosopher was like a materialist / panpsychist. Joseph Smith appeared to be some type of materialist. There's like one thing in the Doctrines and Covenants that seems to indicate he's a materialist. And there is this other type of matter called spirit matter, which to me sounds like a soul, but like it's just totally underdetermined. We don't really know what he meant. There's not a whole lot to go on. Like I asked Joseph Lawal, like, wouldn't it be cool to have like a conference of like, because we had just left this like Mormon conference at BYU, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool to have something like this for Mormonism and philosophy of mind to like figure out like, everything that mentions it in the Book of Mormon and Doctrines of Covenants and like statements from prophets. Like, could we make this square together? Like, what is the Mormon view of consciousness? Because it seems like Mormons are materialists of some kind, but it's totally not clear what kind. Because like in practice, they seem like dualists. They believe in pre-mortal existence, that you are the spirit children of God. We're all children of God, but like you were like specifically the spirit children of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, and you existed before you came to Earth. They're really big, like all Christians, on the physical resurrection. Like that's emphasized, but that doesn't necessarily make you a materialist. And he just said there's really not enough to go off of. He's like there's not enough to have a conference about. Like there's not enough to be able to do what you're saying would be fun to do. Um, yeah, like what you get from Mormonism is just totally underdetermined. You could be a materialist, you could be a dualist, you could be a panpsychist. I mean, it's really open. And I mean, in that way, it's the same as Christianity. You could believe many different things. So I would say it actually probably wouldn't affect my views at all. If it did, it would be really, really slight. Um, okay, so continuing along this sort of history of science argument, and I remember saying this in conversation too, saying like, well, we don't have it all figured out, but science is a safe bet. And I think that's like really the only good argument that's presented in this whole piece, in this WordPress blog. Which, by the way, I don't blog on WordPress anymore. I switched over to Substack to try to give an indication of like there's a break here. Like there's what I said on WordPress and there's what I'm saying on Substack. I don't necessarily stand by what I said on WordPress. Um, anyway, so two things about this whole paradigm argument. The first one is that you need to identify the ways in which the dualistic assumptions are going to differ from the materialist assumptions in a way that would come up in neuroscience. And I think you can do that, but it's like what we know right now, it's not going to come up. Like this came up a lot in the Sean Carroll episode, the emergence episode, where it's like, look, I mean, one thing to note is that every pixel on an fMRI scan represents like 5 or 6 million neurons. Like we're working with very blunt tools right now. So if because for interactionist dualism, you would expect there to be a force at work in the brain that is not fully characterized in like, the core theory. That's true. But you're not going to find out whether or not there are emergent laws by studying the microphysical. Like the microphysical is if you're running experiments in particle accelerators or whatever, it's going to behave the same way, whether materialism is true or whether panpsychism is true or whether substance dualism is true. Like it has never been a part of the dualist theory that like individual atoms or subatomic particles are going to behave differently in a particle collider because of the soul. Like in the brain, that's when you're going to see effects, right? So like the core theory argument just doesn't do anything to refute that. So it's like, yeah, dualists are going to predict that like a Laplacian demon working from the core theory is not going to be able to predict everything that goes on in the brain. That's true. But we have not done that. Like we have not like reduced brain activity all the way down to like, fundamental physics. That has just not happened. So, it's just like, it might be your preference to believe that that is what would happen, but we have not in fact done that. So it's not really like an empirical argument. But, pivoting a little bit, if you look at someone like Descartes, like Brian Cutter brought this up in his debate with David Papineau, what exactly is Descartes going to be thrown off by when it comes to modern neuroscience? I mean, he would be thrown off by a lot of things, like David Papineau brought up large language models, and that would surprise him probably. But like specifically with regards to the causal closure of the brain, Descartes thought that the brain was basically a mechanism, and the whole thing was like a machine. And there's this one part where the soul makes a difference, and that's empirically implausible that it's like that part or whatever. But like he believed in like a physical mechanistic brain, and like all the progress in neuroscience would be very interesting to him, but it's not going to undermine the like interactionist substance dualism. Like the way Brian put it was like, okay, which textbook, like which chapter of which textbook am I going to show Descartes? Like we're going to resurrect Descartes and we're going to show him which chapter of which neuroscience textbook to show him that causal closure is empirically verified. Like there is no answer to that question. So it's not really clear to me like the differences between the dualist and the materialist paradigm are really going to come into play for modern neuroscience. Like it might come into play in future neuroscience, I hope it does. I mean, I'm not like I'm not like rooting against this or something because I want to know how consciousness and the brain are related. But I'm saying like what we know right now, it just goes way beyond what you can rationally say to say that like, oh yeah, dualism has been falsified by neuroscience. Or like the differences, like a dualist paradigm and a materialist paradigm are so different that like we shouldn't expect a materialist paradigm to work. Like, this is like Philip Goff's whole point in Galileo's error, that we kind of removed the qualities, we removed like the anything that can't be observed from science. I'm going to totally botch it. I didn't think about this beforehand, but neuroscience is going well, physical science is going really well, partly because we kind of just removed final causes and, qualities and, anything that's qualitative. Um, hopefully you're familiar with this argument, so it's like not the first time you're hearing it. But he has a whole argument about like why science has progressed so rapidly and why it suddenly seems to be bumping up against some of these problems, like the hard problem of consciousness. It's like, well, yeah, we kind of set this off to one side, but neuroscientists have not delivered on the thing that I seem to be implying here, where it's like, that's the third point I wanted to make, is like there has been no progress made on explaining like phenomenal consciousness. Like, you think neuroscience has like been edging closer to explaining why it's like something to exist? It doesn't even seem like a scientific question. And to the extent that physicalism has made progress, it's because of philosophers. It's because of physicalist philosophers. They have made progress in explaining phenomenal consciousness. Neuroscience is just, it's almost like the wrong kind of tool to explain why is it like something for a brain to exist. I made a video about this called Why Materialism is Unsatisfying. That goes into that a little bit more if you want to hear. But yeah, it has not made any progress on explaining why it's like something to exist. It's made progress on the easy problems, but it has not made any progress on the hard problem. Okay, let's continue on here. Okay, this is Evil Emerson again. We don't have to know how something happens to know that it happens. Very true, sir. Maybe you should apply that to interaction. We don't know how the Earth generates gravity, but we do know that it generates gravity. Before we knew of genes, we still knew that heredity was a real thing. We could see that parents passed physical traits onto their children long before we had any clue how it happened specifically. Any incompleteness you may find in neuroscience models will be of this type. We aren't, yeah, like, how is it that brains are conscious? How is it that it's like something to exist? Any incompleteness you may find in neuroscience models will be of this type. We aren't sure of all the details of how things happen, but that the arrow goes from brain to mind is as certain as anything else in science. Interesting point, sir. I'm not sure that helps the materialist case, but anyway, to deny this as a mere correlation at this point would be like denying that genes cause heredity, because genes only correlate with hereditary traits, or massive objects only correlate with gravitation. We don't fully understand how the brain works and creates the phenomenon of mind. That's just the moment of history we live in. But that doesn't give us license to confuse the question, does A cause B, with how does A cause B? Okay, again, if A causes B, that will not help materialism. That will help dualism. But anyway, let's address setting that confusion aside. Is this like saying genes only correlate with heredity, or, massive objects only correlate with gravitation? Well, first of all, I don't really think there's like a knowledge argument for this. Like, the whole point of the knowledge argument is that this wouldn't work with cases like this. If you knew all the physical facts, then you would know. Like Mary, the physicist, who knows all the facts about gravitation, she's not going to like learn anything new when she leaves the anti-gravity room. I mean, the thing that she learns will be what it feels like, I guess. But like specifically about gravity, like physical facts about gravity, or like with heredity and genes, like those sorts of arguments don't apply. You can't make a parity argument with genes and heredity. Secondly, there's no like explanation argument there where it's like you feel really unsatisfied by like by genes as an explanation of heredity or whatever. like like there is with physicalism. Like if you knew all the physical facts, there's clearly no a priori entailment from like the brain facts to the mental facts. Okay. And arguably that is the case with a lot of other reductions in science. Or if you even if you don't want to put it that strongly, you could still just say there's like a light bulb moment. There's like an aha moment where you get it. Like you're there's this higher order phenomenon. You're explain like it's given a reductionist explanation, and then you go, "Oh, I get it. That makes sense." That is not the case with you know, electrified meat and your phenomenology. And further, physicalists know this, type B physicalists know this, and they embrace the fact that you are never going to have an aha moment. The light bulb is never going to go on. It's never going to be satisfying intellectually to say that physicalism is true. Like David Papineau says this. He says, that just shows that there's something wrong with us. It's not that there's a problem with physicalism, there's a problem with our minds. The fact that we think there's something wrong with physicalism. But of course, like we would feel the same exact way if physicalism were false. Like I also find false explanations unsatisfying, you know. But like that's where you have to go, because if you're a type B physicalist, you think that phenomenal concepts are opaque, you think that there's never going to be this a priori entailment from the physical to the phenomenal. There's never going to be this like satisfying explanation, this like intellectually satisfying reduction. And you just have to make your peace with that. And I say that seems like a red flag. Okay, so next, Evil Emerson says we have Occam's razor on our side. That's true. And then, I kind of he kind of belabors the point with talking about like angels pushing the earth around or something like that. I mentioned this in the live stream. Sorry, I just looked at the chat. What's going on here? What is happening? Saying massive objects only correlate with gravitation is a severe misunderstanding of gravity. Yeah, that was the point. That was exactly the point that was being made. That would be a mistake. And likewise, it's a mistake to say that consciousness only correlates with the brain. That was Evil Emerson's point. Sorry, I'm just looking back at the chat. Okay, so like I was saying in the debate review between James Fodor and David Paulman, it's like this is true as far as it goes, saying that like, oh, materialism has Occam's razor on its side. It's like, yeah, but you need to actually explain consciousness. Like, you can't just say, well, my theory's simpler. It's like, yeah, but it also has to explain the phenomenon. Like, it would be really simple to say nothing exists, but that would be in conflict with our evidence. So it's like, well, Occam's razor is on the side of the nothingists. Yes, I suppose that is true. But what's that saying? Like, you want your theory to be as simple as possible, but not simpler. So I mean, we're not just like, I mean, the rule is like don't multiply entities without necessity, and obviously non-physicalists think there is a reason to multiply entities here. So it's just kind of like an inert point. Okay, the brain as an interface. One objection dualists raise is that the brain could just be an interface for the soul and body. The brain could just be a sort of antenna for the soul. The soul plays the brain and body like a pianist plays the piano. If a string is broken or there's a problem with the instrument, the pianist's music is impaired. This is supposed to account for the robust neural correlation we've observed. Take a sip of water here. Something that both sides brigade pointed out on Substack is that these two analogies that are often invoked have like completely different implications for how consciousness works. Like if the brain is a kind of receiver or like an antenna, for the soul, that's like very different from the piano analogy. So like the radio receiver analogy and the piano analogy imply very different things, you know? Like because if the brain is just kind of passively receiving information from the soul, that puts a lot of things in the soul that are, and it's like the brain is just kind of, you know, it's like a drone being operated with a remote control or something. But the piano analogy, it's like the causation goes the other way. I mean, they just kind of like they're not equivalent analogies. You see what I mean? But both sides brigade is a physicalist, and he pointed out that like yeah, these two analogies actually they don't pair well together. They have like totally different implications. Um, Evil Emerson did not notice that. There are several problems with this analogy. If our soul can play the piano, why can't it play any other instruments? What's being posited here is that you have this immaterial soul that can affect the atoms in your brain and move them around according to your will. So if you can move your arms and legs, for example, which are nothing but large collections of atoms, why can't you move other collections of atoms? It might sound like a joke, but it's a serious question. You believe that you have an immaterial soul that is playing the piano of your brain. This must mean that your soul is moving around the physical stuff that's in your brain and body. Why wouldn't your soul be able to telekinetically bend a spoon, just as it can apparently telekinetically move your fingers to bend a spoon? What's the difference exactly? If William Lane Craig is right, not sure why I picked on him exactly, and I can use my will to bend the collection of atoms that is my thumb, why can't I use my will to go an inch or two outside my thumbs and bend the spoon directly? So, you know, this is an interesting argument. Like, if dualism is true, our priors should be much higher in, you know, parapsychological phenomena. And I think that's true. Like, I think that, you know, dualism is like uniquely capable of accounting for certain things in parapsychology. And if those are well established, which I don't, I mean, to my knowledge, they're not really. There are some interesting kind of like residual cases that are not as easy to explain away, but I would not say that it's like well established that any of these things are real. There's enough to like pique my interest and like make me want to investigate it, but there's not enough at all to say that like, oh, this is well established. And the question is just like, why isn't this real if dualism is true? It certainly could be true if dualism were true. And you know, that's a good question. Like this is something that we could expect on dualism, but not on materialism. So, you know, why not? I mean, if you're a dualist, you don't have to accept parapsychology, first of all. Like you could just say the psychophysical laws are such that we don't live in that world. I mean, yes, it's metaphysically possible, but we live in a world where these things are correlated in this way, and you know, they're just the limitations that are placed on us by nature. You know, it's not like the dualist is committed to thinking that you know telekinesis must be real or like mind to mind communication must be real or something like that. But this is a legitimate question, you know. And on the flip side, if it could be well established that this stuff exists, then that would be great evidence for dualism. Another objection to the piano analogy and the general claim that the brain acts as an interface between soul and body is the interaction problem. Everybody agrees that my mind is made of physical material, even substance dualists. Even those dummies agree that my body is physical. We all agree that our bodies are made of atoms, but when my mind wants to raise my right arm, my physical arm goes up. How is it, if I have an immaterial soul, that my non-physical mind moves the chunk of atoms we're calling my arm? If you want to say there's something else in addition to the brain, you have to explain how that something else interacts with the protons, neutrons, and electrons that make up your brain and arms and legs. Okay, so do I elaborate on this? I mean, just saying how. This is like, I mean, I've gone over this so many times. It just seems tedious to like explain it again. But there's not really even an argument here. It's just saying like, oh, well, how do these things interact? Well, to quote you, Evil Emerson, sir, so let me find it. I can't find it. We don't have to know how something happens to know that it happens, right? So I mean, if that's true, then I don't see what's really being done here by saying like, how is it that these two things interact? I don't know. How does anything interact? You know, like if you look at physical causation, it's not like that's totally unmysterious. Like, I think Hume was at least right about that, that, we don't, like, literally observe causation. Like, okay, so Adam and Eve are in the garden, and they're in the rec room, and they're about to play pool, and it's like one ball rolls across the felt and it hits another. How do they know what's gonna happen? Like, it seems natural to us because we've lived in the world, but, like, if you had no experience with the world, the ball could fly up into the air, it could explode, it could affect a different ball on the table. Like, this kind of, spatial contiguity account or whatever, I just don't think that it really I don't I mean, like, I think it's like, yeah, we observe that being the case, and that's why it seems so intuitive, but, like, would Adam in the garden, would he know that that was about to happen? Like, can he see the causation? That doesn't seem clear to me at all. Um, but anyway, if you go through some of the, like, literature on causation and, like, causal laws and everything, it's a totally plausible, maybe the best view to say that causation is basic, primitive, fundamental, and, that's how physical causation works. And we're saying the same thing with souls and bodies. It's like, yeah, it's primitive, it's basic, it's fundamental. There are just fundamental causal laws between these two things, just like there is with everything in the physical world. Um, and you could go more into depth on that, like Brian Cutter. This was also on Joe's channel. They've done a few dualism videos, but in one of these, Brian outlined like 3 or 4 accounts of how causation could work between a soul and a body. Um, yeah, it's just like, if you've never read anything dualists say about this, this seems like a really good argument. I think I also talked about this in a stream called Fatal Problem for Dualism, or Defending Dualism, or something like that. Fairly recent stream, but okay, here's another argument. You also have to explain how the laws of physics governing the atoms in your body are incomplete or just wrong. Believers, again, believers, are trying to say that there's this stuff that routinely influences matter, but somehow every controlled experiment we've ever performed has failed to detect such an influential particle. If this stuff does somehow interact with physical matter, why haven't we actually found it in experiments? It apparently interacts with physical matter all the time, so you'd think the laws of physics would be violated regularly. Typo. Since they currently don't include any reference to this substance or its interacting with matter. Another typo. Get it together, Evil Emerson. Would violated regularly. It is to this substance or it is interacting with matter. Jeez. I think I am a better writer now than I was back then. Okay, so this is like Sean Carroll's, core theory argument, which we already sort of talked about. Yeah, the predictions with regard to the microphysical realm are identical with interactionist dualism and with materialism. The dualist theory has never been that you're going to detect the soul's activity in a particle collider because it only interacts with brains and bodies. It doesn't interact with like isolated particles. Anyway. So yeah, check out the Sean Carroll video if you want to hear the expanded case for that. Somehow we've missed it while managing to build incredible technology and create life-saving medicine, and while building other fields of science that are contingent on our understanding of physics, like chemistry and biology, without ever discovering a single thing that contradicts these laws. Yeah, we built iPhones, so the soul's not real. Excellent point, sir. And I just continue on. If we removed any mention of protons from our standard model of the stuff that exists in our everyday world, everything we saw would stop making sense because protons are influential. Okay, we've already addressed this. Yes, the soul is influential, okay, but it does not factor into our fundamental physical theories because the soul only interacts with certain configurations of matter under certain conditions. That has always been the dualist theory. This is not like an ad hoc adjustment to try to rescue the theory. Like, dude, just think about what you're saying for a couple seconds. Okay, now, yeah, what do we mean when we say dualism violates scientific knowledge? Let's look at a couple specifics. It would violate conservation of energy. Okay. So I no longer think this is true. Now, there are dualists who are actually okay with that. they're like okay with the I actually wasn't aware of this, but when I talked to Ralph Stefan Weir, he mentioned somebody who has written about this. But the thing is, dualism, even interactionist dualism, doesn't necessarily violate conservation. And the first time this was explained to me was by David Papineau. So let me quote David Papineau real quick. Hang on, let me pull it up. The conservation of energy in itself does not tell which basic forces operate in the physical universe. Are gravity and impact the only basic forces? What about electromagnetism, nuclear forces, and so on? Clearly, the conservation of energy as such leaves it open exactly which basic forces exist. It requires only that, whatever they are, they operate deterministically and conservatively. Okay, so as long as emergent mental forces operate in such a way to pay back all the energy they borrow and vice versa, then they've acted conservatively and can't be ruled out by conservation. Done. Easy. Yeah, I mean, like, do you think Maxwell violated conservation when he added, like fundamental electromagnetic fields? Like, if you add to the ontology of the physical world, even that doesn't violate conservation. Okay. I think I'm making the same kind of argument here. Okay, here's a new argument. Well, not really an argument. I'm just saying I'm also not satisfied that dualists have adequately defined what they're defending in the first place. A soul is supposed to be an immaterial substance? What does that even mean? It almost sounds like a contradiction in terms, like you're saying it's an immaterial material. You're saying that it's like matter, but it's not matter, which has the convenient side effect of preventing me from being able to investigate it. Um, I mean, there's not really an argument here. I'm just saying I'm not satisfied. Duelists have defined their term. Okay, well, what have you read from duelists where they attempted to define it? Let me answer that for you, Evil Emerson. Nothing. You watch some like apologists in debates, okay? Um, but yeah, like I mentioned this in the Terminal Lucidity episode that Ralph Stefan Weir has like an entire chapter about this, about like, okay, why am I like how do I define substance? Is this in line with like how substance is typically defined? Yes, it is. Okay, how do I define property? Here are like the 57 accounts of, like what properties are. Like duelists have gone through great pains to define what they're talking about. You haven't read any of it. You're just saying, I don't know what that means. Okay, well try reading like yeah, just I could stop there. Try reading something. Hang on. Reading ahead here. As I mentioned, I think it's important to explain exactly why the idea of the soul trespasses on the territory of science. Stephen Novella has gone as far as calling dualists neuroscience deniers, and I think he's completely right to do so. You have to outright reject scientific evidence and its implications to believe there's a ghost in the machine. Most Christians who aren't young earth creationists look down on those who are, treating them like they're these unsophisticated science deniers. I mean, they are, but most of those same sophisticated believers would get very upset if you suggest they don't have a soul. Just because your particular form of science denial is more socially acceptable than creationism doesn't make you any less of a science denier. Wow. See, this is what you guys want. You want me to be this guy still. That's actually based. um, yeah, I remember telling Sebastian Montesinos that I said something like that. I couldn't remember exactly, but I was like, yeah, I remember calling dualists neuroscience deniers. And he's like, that's so based. He's like, where's that guy? um, yeah, I don't think it rises to the level of a science denial to say that you have a soul. And people like David Chalmers are like very concerned with being like as scientific as they possibly can be, like approaching this in a scientific way. I'm not as like married to that, but I mean, just read David Chalmers, like read The Conscious Mind. What do you think about that? I mean, he's a pretty, he's almost like he's like a regretful non-physicalist, like you can tell he's like a materialist, like in spirit. Like he really wishes materialism worked out. Like he has those vibes, like he has that type of mind, but um he's just convinced by those arguments. I'm a little less like that, but you know. All right, looks like we're gonna revisit this whole parapsychology point. What about things that make sense on dualism, like mind-to-mind communication, but don't make sense within a materialistic framework? None of the non-materialist phenomena stand to scrutiny, and this is a huge strike against dualism. Is it a huge strike against dualism? I mean, I'm willing to say that, like, in a strict sense, it is some evidence against dualism because this is something that's possible on dualism. But it's hard to say. I mean, you cannot say it's like entailed by dualism or something like that, or it's like, well, naturally there would be telekinesis if dualism were true. Like dualism makes it possible, but is it really like even implied by saying that there's an immaterial soul? Like, yeah, you have a body, but you also have a soul. That's why like an afterlife is possible without a physical resurrection. Like, is that really? Yeah, I don't know if it's a huge strike against dualism. I mean, I think technically it is some evidence against dualism, but kind of an overstatement there. Yeah, and it looks like Mr. Evil Emerson continues on with this point. Yeah, these things are realistic on dualism, mind reading, mind to mind communication, telekinesis, and body switching. Ooh. Hmm. See, that never gets mentioned. Do people actually believe in that? Is that like is there a Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World episode about body switching? Because that seems like a plot device in like movies and books and stuff. Is that like a real thing people believe in? People do believe in like reincarnation, and they have like memories of their past lives and stuff, but that's not the same thing. Like, does anyone think that like a Freaky Friday situation actually happened? There are like two people who were like, yeah, I switched bodies at one point. I mean, the thing is, how would you know? Like that, if your memories and your personality, because normally when people imagine that kind of thing, it's like your memories, your personality, like your sexual orientation, all those things are the same. And then, you just switch bodies, but like you're the same exact person who's still there. But like, I think dualists typically don't want to say that like all that psychological stuff is properly located in the soul. So like if your soul, I mean, imagine if none of it is. Imagine if like memories are encoded in the brain. The soul is responsible for, phenomenal consciousness, why it's like something to exist, but nothing else. Like let's just say that's true. You wouldn't even know if your soul switched bodies. I mean, I guess you could try to present this as like a problem for dualism in a way, but like you wouldn't even know if it happened. Like our souls could be switching bodies all the time and there'd be no way of knowing. Like there'd be a fact of the matter, like I'm not numerically identical to the person I was 5 minutes ago. But there's no way you could know that, Yeah, interesting. Okay, if what we really are is a soul and not a mind that emerges from physical processes, why wouldn't I be able to directly communicate with another mind? Well, I mean, like I said earlier, like the laws of nature could just be such that that just isn't possible. It doesn't mean it's metaphysically impossible. It just means that like, because something like levitation seems metaphysically possible, like we could have lived in like we could have lived in a universe where just the physical laws of nature are such that you could levitate. But we happen to live in a physical world where that's not possible. Like I could say, well, on physicalism, why isn't there levitation? Like, and if the laws of physics were different, that would be physically possible. It's like, okay, but is it a problem for physicalism that levitation isn't real? Well, or is it? I don't know. Yeah, this is like a barrage of questions. Not all of them are really the same thing here. I mean, I guess one way of driving that last point home is like, imagine you lived in a world where red things and round things were like perfectly correlated. Um, This is an example I heard from Brian Cutter. It's like, okay, so every sphere is red and every red thing is a sphere. Like, you can clearly, I mean, the point he was making is different in that context, where it's like you can still conceptually separate these things and you would still believe it's metaphysically possible for there to be like a blue sphere, even if it happened to be an empirical fact that like all spheres are red, all red things are spheres. It's like, yeah, well, I can conceive of a blue sphere, and I think it's possible that there could be a blue sphere. It's a very interesting fact that in our world, these things seem to be lawfully correlated, but it would be totally bizarre to say that they're the same thing, or that like, oh, redness is identical to roundness, or like the roundness is constituted by the redness. No, I don't think that. I mean, like someone with a taste for like desert ontology, someone with like a reductionist mindset might be tempted to do that if it were such a reliably observed empirical fact. But you know, the non-physicalists, or their equivalent in that world, they would say like, well, these don't appear to be the same thing at face value. I can make like a conceivability argument. I can make a knowledge argument. Um, I don't think these are the same thing. I think it's metaphysically possible for there to be a blue sphere. Um, but yeah, I mean, like that's kind of how I view this, where it's like, look, it happens to be the case that we live in this universe with laws of nature that are such that we can't do these things that you're talking about. But it's metaphysically possible. Sure, it's an interesting fact that these things aren't real, as best we can tell. But what conclusion am I really supposed to draw from that? Okay, what keeps my particular soul anchored to my body in the first place? Um, yeah, I mean that's a good question. Like these are not all bad questions. I'll say that. Like, why does this soul? Because like I said a minute ago, if our souls switched bodies, given certain assumptions, we wouldn't know. So assuming that's not happening, why is it the case? And again, I'm just going to refer back to Brian Cutter. I've been referring to him a lot this episode. Um, there are dualistic accounts of how that works exactly. Um, it's not like an unanswerable question, but it is a good question. I don't mean to say that Evil Emerson is a complete idiot. Like some of these are legitimate questions, but like, am I supposed to reject dualism because of this question? Really? Like if I'm totally convinced by like the zombie argument, the knowledge argument, I'm supposed to be like, oh, geez, never mind. Because I mean, there are answers to this, but it's just like, what's the point? I mean, like, this is an interesting question, but like, I thought we were supposed to be explaining why science is incompatible with the soul. Like, I thought that was the aim. And I don't see how that furthers the same at all. Yeah, materialism couldn't accommodate these things. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we kind of already went over this. Okay, out of body experiences and NDEs. Hang on, let me check the chat again. Oh, good Lord. Sorry, I have not been looking at the chat. Okay, let me see here. Muhammad says, quick question, is it at least rational to believe in physicalist/materialist theories of mind given the hard problem of consciousness? Okay, well, I think that rationality is a pretty low bar. Like saying, is it rational to believe, X, Y, or Z? It's like, that's actually not that hard to establish. So, like, yes, it could be rational, like, given your base of evidence, like, given your distinct intuitions and the books you've read and the videos you've watched, like, it is easily conceivable that you could have a base of knowledge, a unique base of knowledge, a unique position on the epistemic landscape that would make it rational for you to accept physicalism. Yes, totally. Okay, but once you've been enlightened, once you've been enlightened by Philip Goff and Brian Cutter and Ralph Stefan Weir, I mean, again, the key word there is rational. And I think that that's such a low bar to clear. It's like, yeah, of course it can be rational to be a physicalist. That said, I think there are like very good arguments against physicalism that compel me to reject it. And when I engage with people like about this question, it just seems totally lacking to me. It seems like you're going to have these commitments that are actually directly relevant. to your physicalist view, not stuff like, oh, how is it the case that this soul is paired to this body? It's like, yeah, that's a good question, but I don't see why it would motivate me to reject dualism. Whereas the recognition that type B physicalists have to accept phenomenal opacity seems like a good reason to reject physicalism. Okay, so I think that there are really good reasons to reject physicalism. There are really great arguments against physicalism. There are not really comparatively good arguments for physicalism. Physicalists basically say, well, the mind and the brain are correlated. Well, physical causal closure is true. It's like, what am I even supposed to do with that? Like, yeah, I know the mind and the brain are correlated. Everyone knows that. It's accommodated by every theory ever. Okay. And it's not clear how you can even explain phenomenal consciousness. Second of all, physical causal closure is not like observed to be true. That is not as well established as people seem to think it is. And even if it was, it wouldn't rule out non physicalism. Like I said, I was totally convinced by Sean Carroll's core theory argument, which is like related to causal closure. And that's why I became a panpsychist initially instead of a dualist. Because I'm like, hey, I believe in physical causal closure, but I'm also convinced of these non-physicalist arguments. It's like, okay, so I'm a Russellian panpsychist. I totally retain the causal closure of the physical world, and I think these non-physicalist arguments work. So even if you accepted physical causal closure, it doesn't rule out non-physicalism, because there's such a thing as Russellian panpsychism. It doesn't even rule out dualism, because you could still be an epiphenomenalist, or you could be like an overdeterminationist. I mean, yeah, the only thing it rules out is interactionist, non-overdeterminationist substance dualism. That's it. And that's when I would make the point that, like, how do you know this? Again, like, we resurrect Descartes. We show him a modern neuroscience textbook. What chapter are we pointing him to be like, hey, physical causal closure is true? Bad news for interactionism. Okay, Gary is saying, I just can't comprehend a thing that isn't actually physical. Even the things we consider non-physical, like thoughts, concepts, emotions, would just be identical to neurochemical processes. Um, you really can't comprehend like a number. Like, you think numbers are physical? I mean, more likely you just think numbers are not real. But like, we're just talking strictly conceivability here. Like, you can't conceive of like Platonism being true. You can't conceive of numbers existing but not being physical. I mean, I think it's kind of odd that you can't conceive of consciousness being non-physical. Like, if you want to be a physicalist, that's um, morally permissible, I suppose. But like, you can't even conceive of like panpsychism being true or like dualism being true. Because even in this post, I'm not going that far. I'm just saying, like, I think it's ruled out by science. I'm not saying, well, I can't even conceive of what it would mean for like property dualism to be true. I did kind of say that about substance dualism, where I'm like, oh, I don't know what an immaterial substance is supposed to mean. But the thing is, I wasn't trying very hard. That was my point. It's like, if if you just try a little harder, if you read a little bit, you can get a distinct idea of what the position is. And a benefit of that is that you can engage with the view more, and you might discover problems with the view that no one else has noticed before. But like, it starts with comprehending the position. He elaborates, I can conceive of it in the same way I can conceive of Harry Potter casting spells. It doesn't make sense, but I suppose I could conceive it. Well, Harry Potter casting spells is kind of like, that's actually a good example of like something that seems metaphysically possible, but, is not physically possible. Where it's like, okay, the laws of nature could be such that there are these like, they're just these strange phenomena that are controlled by like our mental states and the words that we utter. And like, some people have this ability, other people don't for some reason. Um, it seems like metaphysically possible. Like, God could have made spell casting a part of the universe if he had so chosen. If there's an omnipotent being who exists, like, could he have done that if he had so chosen? Well, if you think yes, then you think it's metaphysically possible. Let's go. Based. Schopenhauer was a panpsychist, but Bernardo Kastrup is not ready for that conversation. Okay, so I also talk about out-of-body experiences and NDEs. Is this just going to be more of the same? No. Okay, so I talk about out-of-body experiences specifically. Okay. Yeah, and this would fit perfectly within the dualistic account, but it's awkward to explain on materialism. Okay, so here's my response to the OBE stuff. Neuroscientists can actually cause you to have an out-of-body experience just by altering your brain activity. They can do this reliably under controlled conditions. Your brain actually creates the sense that you're inside your body, and neuroscientists long ago identified the specific region that creates this sense. When researchers use transcranial magnetic stimulation to inhibit the functioning of the temporal parietal junction, subjects have an out-of-body experience. When this brain region is inhibited by reducing the flow of electricity to that region, you float out of your body. We can reliably create the subjective experience of an out-of-body episode by altering brain activity. Pretty compelling, right? Turns out that's actually not true. Again, obviously I don't know what I'm saying here. Like, I'm just repeating things that Stephen Novella said. And I actually tracked down the paper that I assume he's talking about. And it's like, he was just massively overstating what is actually possible here. Like, it is just not true that you can use TMS to cause you to float out of your body. That is actually just not true. Okay, like, I can link the papers in the show notes of this, but like, this is like a massive exaggeration. Okay. But there's something actually that as I was reading that, I noticed something else that I said that I didn't actually like that much. At face value, this appears to fit perfectly within the dualistic account, but is awkward to explain on materialism. Maybe this is a hot take, but I'm actually not so sure of that first part, that this fits perfectly within the dualistic account. Because, like, okay, so let's imagine this. You are an immaterial soul. You get close to death, and for some unknown reason, your soul floats out of your body, and then you're looking down at yourself. Okay, how is that happening? How are you, like, is light hitting your soul? Like, are photons impacting on your soul directly? Because I thought the dualist account was that you need eyes. Like, it is not my understanding of the dualistic theory that you do not need eyeballs to see things. Okay, like, if this fit perfectly in the dualistic account, then it's like, why is there even such a thing as blindness? Just use your soul. Use your soul, idiot. What are you doing? What do you need eyes for? You can just look with your soul. It's like, no, dualists think that the physical body plays really important roles in creating your phenomenology. So it's like, wait, how are you seeing this if you're a dualist? Like, how are you're floating around, and like, your soul is now spatially located. That's the first red flag. Like, your soul is now spatially located above your body. Wait, the soul is spatially located? Like, I thought that was pretty much universally denied. So it's like, now you think the soul is spatially located away from your body, and light is just directly hitting, and sound waves are hitting your soul. It's like, wait a second, this is just like throwing out everything that dualists were saying 10 seconds ago. So, like, I agree in a sense that some of this NDE stuff, it does seem to fit better with dualism than with materialism. But it's like, are you having a hallucination? That's possible on materialism. It's also possible on dualism. Are you having a false memory? Is it possible that you, like, information was coming in when you were unconscious, and then when you became conscious, there's this whole scene that was created in your mind, and you mistakenly think it's a memory when it wasn't? That seems possible. I mean, it again, like, maybe this technically fits a little better with dualism than with materialism, but it does kind of just throw out everything that dualists would ordinarily say. So I'm actually not so sure that this fits perfectly within the dualistic account. Um, yeah, I've always had that question about like NDEs and out of body experiences. It's like it's treated like it just totally supports unambiguously, no caveats, the soul. But it's like, wait, how do you think this stuff works under normal conditions? It seems like your brain and your eyes and stuff like seems like your eyes are, doing things. And then suddenly they're just not necessary. Okay, we have finally reached the end. Okay, if you're a Christian and you want to deny neuroscience to maintain the Bible's teaching that we have an immaterial soul, then be my guest. Does the Bible really teach that? I mean, it's debatable. Maybe not. Anyway, you're driving smart people away from Christianity by doing so. And if you're a Christian who accepts science and is not a substance dualist, thank you for conceding yet another thing we used to attribute to God and driving more people away from Christianity. So it's heads you win, tails you lose. Or wait, no, it's heads I win, tails you lose. Yeah, so I'm trying to do like the young Earth creationist line here, where it's like, okay, if you want to double down on young Earth creationism, you're just driving smart people away from your religion. But if you make concessions, it seems like you're going to have the same effect on a lot of people, because they're going to be like, well, I guess this traditional teaching was wrong. I mean, obviously it's debatable how traditional the teaching actually is, but I don't know if it really works as well with this dualist thing. I mean, obviously it's just not the same thing. Like neuroscience denier. If you want to deny neuroscience, then be my guest. Yeah, I just don't think it rises to that level of like you're a neuroscience denier. If you think we have a soul, it's just not the same thing. Okay, I'm only trying to point out that if you're going to deny science, you're inevitably going to create problems for yourself. But if you bite the bullet, you don't just erase the last 2 millennia of Christian history. If you accept neuroscience or evolution or that stars can't fall on the surface of the earth, you're admitting that Christianity got the wrong answer for the majority of its history. Neuroscience is progressing, and the gap where apologists are trying to jam their God is slowly closing. If you insist on placing God in the current gaps of our knowledge and claiming that's evidence, you're making the same mistake your predecessors made over and over again throughout history. As this gap continues to be filled in, the Christians who stubbornly bet against naturalism and insisted on using this argument will have to deny more and more evidence. The Christians who see the writing on the walls will try to reinterpret the Bible's teachings and claim that only simple-minded, unsophisticated literalists would ever dream of taking the Bible for what it says. Meanwhile, the number of people who see that you're both wrong slowly grows. If you want to chain your God to a sinking ship like you did with creationism and intelligent design, be my guest. Yeah, so notice how I don't capitalize God. Yeah, so it's like there's clearly like an anti-theistic bent to Evil Emerson. Like I'm clearly on a mission here. It's not just like let's explore philosophy of mind. It's like, the podcast was called Counter Apologetics. Like the point was I agree with Bertrand Russell that I'm as sure that this stuff is false as I am that it's harmful. And, now I'm a lot squishier on the harmful point. I don't really think it's like, I mean, yes, it can be harmful. There are many, many examples of religion being harmful, but to say that it's like a net negative, I don't think you can be confident of that. I mean, it's certainly not my opinion anymore that religion is like a net negative for people. But yeah, I don't know. Do you guys agree with it? Do you like this? do you guys like this shit? I don't know. It seems very of its time, I guess. This is still the era where like anti-theism was pretty explicit. Because in a way, I was about to say when anti-theism was popular, but in a way, anti-theism is like still just as popular, if not more popular, but it's not explicit. Like people don't call themselves anti-theists. They don't really explicitly say these things, but I've noticed, especially on like social media, that it doesn't take much for people to really like, the fangs come out with religion a lot. It seems like, the new atheists really did have this enduring impact on our culture, where a lot of people do just view religion as like this harmful net negative, falsehood that we'd be better off without, even though they're not as like new atheisty about it. But I think that a lot of people do hold that opinion, probably way more people than held it 25 years ago. That's my general sense, I guess. It's just kind of funny after like playing a small part in it to like reverse on practically everything I said in this episode. What do I attribute the tempering of evil Emerson to? Reading, honestly. Like, I mean, I was an extremely confident physicalist, and I just want to say again, there are physicalists who I respect intellectually who make a formidable case for physicalism. I was clearly not one of them. Although I say that, but like, is this not representative of like where most physicalists are at on the internet? Like, this just looks like my comment section, you know? So I say this is like a terrible case for physicalism because it is, but it's the same as like what you encounter on YouTube, you know. But that said, there are real, like, really intelligent physicalists who I respect, and you know, if I debated them, I'd have to really prepare. You know, I'd be really intimidated. But I guess the tempering of evil Emerson. I'm trying to retrace my steps here. So I think it started with like Galen Strawson convincing me that I could kind of have it both ways. Like I could be a non-physicalist and a physicalist, basically. Like panpsychism is a form of materialism. So when I first became a non-physicalist, I was kind of coping and denying it for a while. I was still calling myself a physicalist, even though I was like on the side of the non-physicalists for everything. And eventually I was like, you know, it's just too confusing to say I'm a physicalist and a panpsychist. I'm a physicalist, but I think these non-physicalist arguments work. It's just, you know, like Galen Strawson is technically correct about the things he says about how panpsychism should count as a form of materialism. But like clearly it's a part of the spirit of materialism that consciousness arrived late. You know, like it's like this macroscopic phenomenon that is localized to things with brains. And that's usually not explicitly a part of the theory, or at least oftentimes it's not. But you can just make that one stipulation, and then it's like, okay, well then panpsychism is not materialism. It seems a little ad hoc. It seems like you're just trying to rule out panpsychism, but still, I mean, just for communicating clearly, it's just better to call yourself a non-physicalist. So I guess it happened gradually. Like I read Galen Strawson, and you know, like that book, Things That Bother Me, it was just like reading my own opinions put way more eloquently. So it's sort of like he gave me permission to be a non-physicalist, and maybe Sam Harris before that set me up a bit. And then from Galen Strawson, you start reading, for instance, like his student, Philip Goff, and I started reading Hedda Hasselmerk. But yeah, it really just came down to learning more about philosophy. Like I read that Michael Huemer passage at the beginning. I just learned more about philosophy. I started reading more books about philosophy. I read papers about philosophy of mind instead of just like, you know, some skeptic's blog and like listening to YouTube videos or whatever. So, I mean, honestly, that's probably the main thing is I just learn. I mean, also I'm older now. You know, because in a way, I kind of miss this. I kind of miss being like so confident and like kind of firebrandy, like with your views. And now I'm just kind of like agnostic about everything. I'm like, oh, gee, I don't know. I don't know anything. And it's like, it's great to be so self-assured. It feels so good to just have the world completely figured out. But, you know, I think part of it's just, you know, maturity. You just get older and realize that that's nonsense. So part of it's just aging. Part of it is learning more about philosophy and philosophy of mind specifically. I think like those are the two main things, honestly. One thing is outside my control. It's just getting older, and you tend to chill out a bit. And the other thing is just learning more about philosophy, and that'll make you less confident in everything that you. Because remember, I started with apologetics, so it's like you start with apologetics and then you go into philosophy. And yeah, your confidence is going to be lowered. The closer you get to philosophy and the farther you get from apologetics, I believe that is just going to happen. You're just going to be less confident in all the things that you think. But yeah, I mean, sometimes this happens. Like Paul Draper started off trying to defend theism against the problem of evil, and then he convinced himself writing about it and thinking about it deeply in the exact opposite direction. And that's what happened to me with physicalism. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Best resources for arguments against physicalism. So it depends where you're at in your philosophy of mind journey. Like Galileo's Error by Philip Goff is a great book, even if you're not new to it. I think that's a fantastic book, but it is aimed at like a general public. Hedda Hasselmerk has a book called Non-Physicalist Theories of Consciousness. It's one of those like element books that's like super short. You can probably get the PDF for free. Um, because there are lots of books that I like for philosophy of mind, but I don't know if I would recommend them because you asked specifically about arguments against physicalism. Honestly, if I had to pick one, it would definitely be this one, Consciousness and Fundamental Reality by Philip Goff. That is more of an advanced book. It is more advanced, but that is the best one that I can think of off the top of the dome here. But I remember trying to read this earlier, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I really didn't like it. I didn't understand what he was talking about. But then, like, the deeper I got into it, I came back to it, and it was like eating a good meal after surviving off of like candy and soda or something. Um, so I think you have to be in the right place to appreciate it and understand it. But yeah, Philip Goff is great. Galen Strawson is great. Galen Strawson is not gay. Galen Strawson is gay. Hedda Hasselmerk. Ralph Stefan Weir's book. I was thinking about that one, but that's sort of more focused on arguing from non-physical properties to substances. Although that's also a good one to read. There's lots of related, I mean, like there's all kinds of good tangents in that book that are relevant to arguments against physicalism. But as I've mentioned lately, I think like the crux of the issue really does come down to phenomenal transparency, and that's explored at length in detail in Consciousness and Fundamental Reality. That's the main reason why I recommend that book. But he also goes through, the conceivability argument and knowledge arguments. I think that's the best one. Yeah, I mean, if we're talking books, yeah. Um, yeah, on the spot, it's hard to think of it. Maybe I'll make a list and like put it in the comments or something. So would you say you are a substance dualist now? What's your best evidence for that position? I would not say I'm a substance dualist. I wouldn't exactly like object to that characterization the same way I don't really object when people call me an atheist. But hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I've said, it's my second favorite position. My first favorite is Russellian panpsychism. Second favorite is interactionist substance dualism. Third favorite is Mysterianism. Um, what's the best evidence for dualism, though? Well, okay, so like the best single piece of evidence, I mean, that's difficult because the reason I'm a non-physicalist comes down to arguments, so it's not like I would cite an observation. I mean, first of all, because consciousness is not publicly observable. Um, yeah, it's hard to cite observation because, like I said, I don't really go in for a lot of these parapsychology arguments. I mean, if any of those worked out, it would be good evidence for dualism. Um, and I think it's worth investigating. It's not a priori that stuff is false. You have to actually investigate it. But I really like conceivability arguments. I think that's yeah, those are probably my favorite arguments for non-physicalism right now. But yeah, speaking about evidence is a little difficult because even the case for physicalism is going to come down to arguments. You might cite some observations like the correlations or what have you, but you have a lot of work to do after that. Okay, like it's going to come down to arguments. Like whether you are a physicalist or a non-physicalist, it is going to come down to philosophical arguments. So you're not going to get away from it. Oh, thank you. If this is your first time, you should check out my Philosophy of Mind playlist. There's a lot more content. Um, and I have like a consciousness playlist, and I think that has everything that, anything and everything related to consciousness is on that playlist. And then the philosophy of mind playlist is pared down. It's like the stuff that I stand by the most. Like, I think it's the best content I've made about philosophy of mind. But yeah, definitely check out that playlist. Oh, I mentioned Rough Stone Rolling on another channel, and that's why you checked it out. Oh, that's funny. Probably the first time that's happened. Rough Stone Rolling is the best biography of Joseph Smith, for those who don't know. It's pretty much the only book about Mormonism I've read besides, well, it's the only book I've read from, cover to cover. Um, Other than that, it's just been like certain chapters of certain books and stuff. But oh, that's funny. Jokes aside, was Arthur Schopenhauer actually a panpsychist? I sincerely thought he was an idealist. Well, the thing is, the line between those two positions is blurry a lot of the time. Like, even Bernardo Kastrup says, I have a lot of contemporaries, but they all call themselves like cosmopsychists, which is a particular form of panpsychism. Um, so if you go to, I believe it is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on panpsychism, which Philip Goff wrote, or I think William Seeger wrote the original and Philip Goff updated it. He mentions Schopenhauer, and he sort of gives his justification there. It's like only a paragraph or two about why he thinks Schopenhauer could very easily, rightly be classified as a panpsychist. But yeah, I mean, those two were not really mutually exclusive. I was just kind of, because Bernardo Castro gets super upset if you say he was a panpsychist. So I was kind of joking a little bit, but in reality, the line between those positions is blurry. Like, if you're going to be like a full-on subjective idealist, like a Berkeleyan idealist, then yes, that is distinct from panpsychism. But Schopenhauer does not appear to have been that type of idealist, and Kastrup isn't either. So yeah, when you're talking about like objective idealism or, Russellian cosmopsychism, it seems like these are the same, at least as far as the big picture is concerned. Have I heard of the hard problem of digestion that parodies the hard problem of consciousness? Um, no, but I've heard 50,000 other parodies that are exactly the same. Like, there's an article called The Hard Problem of Breakfast that I saw Patricia Churchland approvingly repost. And, Dan Dennett does the same thing with niftiness. That's directed at panpsychism more specifically, but, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, look, you say I have breakfast in front of me, but I don't see any breakfast. I just see bacon and eggs and orange juice and pancakes. But where's the breakfastiness? Where's the breakfastness? That intangible, ineffable breakfastness that's above and beyond the pancakes and the bacon. And it's like, those parodies are so funny to me because they imply type A physicalism. Because there's clearly like there's like a satisfying reduction of breakfast to the components of breakfast. Like, the constituents of breakfast come together to make breakfast, and anyone can see that. There's no hard problem of breakfast. You just, like, yeah, breakfast is just these things arranged breakfast wise. That's all there is to it, and anyone can see that a priori. So it's like, are you saying consciousness is the same way when you say the hard problem of breakfast or digestion or whatever, where it's like, okay, I should be able to see why this particular brain state is conscious. Like, okay, here's a particular like buzzing of the electrochemical brain activity, like this wet tissue, this electrified me. Are you saying that I should look at an fMRI scan and be like, he's seeing a turtle? Like, you obviously can't do that. It's not a priori, and then you might ask why. Why is it not a priori? Why is it so different from breakfast? And then you're either going to become a non-physicalist, or you're going to have to become a type B physicalist who says, no, 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 there's no a priori entailment. And further, you will never have a satisfying explanation of consciousness. We just happen to know that these things are a posteriori identical because they're correlated, I guess, and because causal closure is true. So yeah, I have seen those analogies, and I just think it's funny because it commits people to a radical form of physicalism that they don't want to accept. So it's Philip Goff. I mean, it's not just Philip Goff, but yeah. Here, wait, let me take this. I don't think I need this up anymore. But yeah, check out my WordPress blog if you want to see some terrible takes. What's this here? Yeah, I mean, yes and no. It is Philip Goff, but it's not just Philip Goff. Yeah, I would not recommend treating Philip Goff like Shopi treated women. Do not shove Philip Goff down the stairs because he's annoying. We can look at brain scans and determine what a person is thinking. Well, I mean, yes and no. My point was that it's not a priori. Like you can't like look at a brain scan. Like, if you've heard the Mary argument, Mary didn't know what it's like to see red, and the point is like if you do know, hey, this brain state correlates with seeing red. It's like, okay, but could you have worked that out a priori, or do you know that because you asked people, like you asked patients and subjects, what are you seeing right now? And then we documented their brain activity, and it turns out that brain activity is correlated with seeing red. I don't know if that's a realistic example, but I mean, to the extent that we can look at brain scans and determine what a person is thinking, I would question that in the first place. But just granting it, we know it because we put people in brain scanners, and then we ask them what they're thinking, seeing, feeling, whatever, and then we, reliably reproduce that, and we think, okay, that brain activity goes along with that thought pattern. If we can do that, that's the reason why we can do that, or someday we'll be able to do that. It's not because you can just look at the brain activity and work out a priori, like, oh, well, this must be a blue experience. Just look at the way the brain is buzzing. I mean, we wouldn't even know about consciousness if we weren't conscious. You just can't observe consciousness. Scrolling back through the chat a bit. Okay, maybe a couple more questions and then we will call it a day here. Okay, so serious stuff for a sec. I get this weird feeling of consciousness actually emerging from the brain when I hear of those evolutionary gradual developments of self-models and such. Yeah, I mean, there definitely was a gradual development of self-modeling. But consciousness itself emerging, I think that is problematic. I mean, there's sort of two arguments, and I think this is like an old video, I think called Can Physicalism Explain Phenomenal Consciousness? And that was sort of like my earliest kind of like big picture, like here's why I'm not a physicalist video. And there are kind of two arguments there that I remember off the top of my head. One is just like this intuition, and I'm happy to just call it an intuition. If you don't have it, then fine. But Galen Strawson talks about this where you try to imagine like putting non-conscious bits of things together until it somehow becomes like something for that entity. It just doesn't seem like you can do that. I mean, again, I'm not just totally hanging my hat on that. I'm just reporting an intuition that I have. It just seems like you're not going to put together non-conscious stuff, unfeeling stuff. It's not like anything for this physical stuff. And you just put it together in the right way, and somehow it becomes like something for that particular entity. Like, it seems a bit like putting abstract objects together in just the right way, and then it's like, well, we don't have it all figured out yet, but if we put abstract objects together in just the right way, concrete objects will emerge. And there's this strong intuition that like, no, you can't do that. That's just the wrong kind of thing. Abstract objects are the wrong kind of material. It's just, or, it's not even material. Like you can't put non-concrete things together in such a way that concreta emerge. And that's just an intuition, but I don't see any reason to reject it. So I have that same feeling about consciousness. And, there are plenty of things like this. You can, like Ralph Stefan Weir gives this funny example about a variation of chess that he and his friend invented called royal chess. It's very, very difficult. Each player only has a king. It's very difficult to win at royal chess. And like, people see why that's funny because you immediately recognize it is not possible to checkmate your opponent in royal chess. Like, do you have to play out every single variation of every single game and map out like every possible configuration of the board to figure out that you can't checkmate your opponent in royal chess? Like, you just immediately see it. Um, and you know, Patricia Churchland would say, "Oh, you're putting up the white flag too early." It's like, yeah, but I think I think that this is like fundamentally mistaken. So I just give that as an analogy because there are other things like this where you say, well, that's just the wrong kind of material. Like, you can't get concrete objects from non-concrete objects. You're not going to checkmate your opponent in royal chess, and I don't think you're going to get phenomenal consciousness, what its likeness, out of non-conscious stuff. Now, that said, not every non-physicalist has that intuition. Okay, so like Philip Goff claims to not have that intuition, and he's a non-physicalist, you know? So, I mean, it's not like this is crucially important to the non-physicalist case or something, but I think a lot of people do feel this way, including physicalists. Like, Dan Dennett said, you know, when I squint just right, I can kind of see how, you know, you might think there's this extra inner glow that's like over and above the functions of the brain, like what consciousness does for us. But I've learned not to credit the hunch. So it's like, and that's what I did too. It's like, it's not that I never had the intuition of the hard problem of consciousness. Like, I just don't even know what people are talking about when they say there's a hard problem. No, I can perfectly clearly see the problem, but I just didn't credit the hunch. I'm like, I shouldn't trust that intuition. You know, there are some intuitions that you have reason to reject, that, you know, there are defeaters, there are undercutting or rebutting defeaters for doubting your intuition. I just don't think we have that in this case. I don't see any reason to reject the intuition. The second argument, that's maybe more consequential, I guess, against this like gradual evolution point, is that phenomenal consciousness appears to be non-vague in the technical sense. Like, it appears to be sharp, meaning it doesn't admit of borderline cases. So I think it is either like something to exist or it is like nothing to exist, and that is exhaustive. Those are the two options. So just to repeat that more slowly, I think it is either like nothing to exist or it is anything other than that. Those are the two options. It is either like nothing to exist or it is like anything at all to exist. And there's no middle ground there. You know, like when people say, why is there something rather than nothing? They never try to carve out some kind of middle ground of like, why isn't there kind of something? Because you can just immediately see, if there's something, if there's anything at all, then there's something rather than nothing. So the question is always posed, why is there something rather than nothing? Not why is there something rather than nothing, or maybe some kind of middle ground. And I think the same applies for whether it is like something or like nothing. So it doesn't admit of borderline cases, in my view. I don't think phenomenal consciousness could have gradually evolved. I think there must have been a sharp moment when it wasn't like anything, and then suddenly it was like something. It's going to be kind of difficult to locate a place where you think that that must have happened. And even, I mean, I don't think you'll locate a place where you think it must have happened, but even if you identify a place where you think it did happen, it's going to seem arbitrary at first blush. So the thought is, why not just treat it like it's fundamental? Because fundamental things do have this property of sharpness and non-vagueness, you know. Consciousness seems a lot like a fundamental property in that respect. So, you know, your panpsychist senses should be tingling here. The vagueness argument is like a uniquely good argument for panpsychism, specifically, not just non-physicalism. And that's why Michael Tai, oh, I have his book right here, actually. Michael Tai was a physicalist philosopher for many years. It's blurred out, sorry. This book is called Vagueness and the Evolution of Consciousness, and you might like it. It's very short. It's mainly like the preface in the first chapter that's most relevant to this. And the rest of it is about like Russellian monism and animal consciousness and other things that he's worked on. But, you know, he was a physicalist for decades, and he became a panpsychist as a result of the vagueness argument, because he thinks consciousness is non-vague. And if it's non-vague, it's sort of more at home fundamentally. So he thinks this is an argument for panpsychism. Um, yeah, so just going back, I think that video I made way back when about why I'm not a physicalist, I think this was kind of like my main argument along with the like anti-emergence argument. Um, yeah, obviously there's more to be said, but that's why I think evolution can't really account for consciousness, because if it did, it would admit of borderline cases, because brain states admit of borderline cases, organisms admit of borderline cases. There was no first human. Like, there wasn't like a sharp cutoff from like, well, a non-human gave birth to a human and that's how the human race began. It's like, no, there was this slow, gradual change and development, and there was no first human. And so even human beings admit of borderline cases where there are going to be borderline cases between humans and non-humans. You could take a particular brain state and you could adjust it by like one atom at a time. You just remove one atom, and at some point it is going to be vague whether or not it's still in that brain state. Okay, but like with the existence or non-existence of consciousness, that doesn't seem possible. I will say, if you're looking for a non-arbitrary line, integrated information theory does claim to provide that, where it gives a non-arbitrary answer for, why here and not there. So if you're interested in that, it takes that seriously. It takes the sharpness of consciousness seriously, and it factors it into a neuroscientific theory of consciousness. Okay, well, oh, hang on, there's some more. We are approaching 2 hours here, though. I don't know. There's one more thing that seems interesting here that I want to talk about, and then we will say goodbye. So bringing back up Mary's room, I think Mary does have a neurochemical reaction occur in her brain that she never had happen before when she leaves the room and sees red for the first time. Yeah, so I mean, it seems like there is an epistemic gap then between the physical facts and the mental facts. Because if she knew all the physical facts in the black and white room, she couldn't work out a priori what it was like to see red. She had to actually have the experience to know what it's like to see red. Then that at least establishes an epistemic gap between the physical and the phenomenal. And if you want to take the argument farther, then that's fine. But you could just stop there. You could say, look, this at least establishes an epistemic gap, and that's going to factor into non-physicalist arguments. But this stuff was interesting to me, this new color stuff, because this is actually also in Frank Jackson's original paper that had Mary in it. There's a lesser known character named Frank, who it's sort of like an inverted Mary case where Frank sees a color that you and I can't see. And we run some tests that convince us that he is actually seeing a color, like he can sort things based on this color. We become convinced he is actually seeing something that we can't see. And the question is just, are we ever going to know what it's like to see that color that Fred sees without just having the experience ourselves? Well, no. Like, you could learn all the neuroscience you want. You could become the world's greatest neuroscientist. You are just not going to know what it's like to see the color that Fred is seeing unless you undergo that experience yourself. That seems to establish there's an epistemic gap between the physical facts and the mental facts. Yeah, I mean, I guess we could imagine it if it resembled other colors, but I think the thought is like it doesn't really resemble. I don't know. I'd have to go back and read the paper. Because I mean, if we're just talking about a shade of blue that you've never seen, if you've seen other shades of blue, then like you could plausibly just imagine it. But the point is, like, can you work out from the physical facts what it's like to see this color? And if you can't, then there's an epistemic gap. Yeah, I think I agree with this. There's still consciousness and more intense consciousness, though. Like there's less awareness and there's more awareness, but yeah, it just needs to pop out at some point. Yeah, I agree with that. It does just need to pop out at some point. There's going to be this bright line where it wasn't like anything, it was like nothing, and then it's like something. But yeah, everything else about consciousness comes in degrees. Everything else about consciousness is vague. Like it can be vague whether you're having a red experience or an orange experience. You could have more or less awareness, like you're saying. Yeah, everything else I think comes in degrees of intensity, like you're saying. It's just the existence of phenomenal consciousness, I think, is not vague. Well, thank you, sir or madam. Um, okay, we are approaching the 2 hour mark here. So far, I'm staying good. I'm staying true to my promise that I would do a weekly live stream. We did one last week. It was a debate review between James Fodor and David Paulman. Now we got another live stream under our belts on Science versus the Soul, Evil Emerson, debunked. Um, but yeah, I don't have anything planned for this next live stream. I've been keeping my eyes open on YouTube, like just on the lookout for something that might be fun to react to or talk about. Some of you have suggested that I respond to the Mormons are atheists video from Than over at Inspiring Philosophy. Um, I guess. I mean, if I can't think of anything else, then I guess. But it just seems like it would seem like killing a fly with a sledgehammer. And there already was a good response video. It's just so transparently silly. Um, yeah, I mean, I just don't want to fall for it. Like this is rage bait, and he put it out there knowing it would piss off Mormons and knowing that there would be some people like me and like what was his name? Like a In Philosopher's Garb, I think was the YouTube channel. He had a great response video to that, and he's friends with Than and everything. And by the way, I'm totally cool with Than. I don't know. Some people were like, they were like, "Oh, so you hate him or something?" It's like, no, I like him. I've recommended his channel multiple times. That's kind of why it bothers me that he did this, because frankly, it seems beneath him. It seems below him to do this. And it just seems like clickbait. I don't even see how he could believe what he's saying. Yeah, it just seems like it's red meat for his followers who are idiots. Like he's not an idiot. Not all of his followers are idiots. But like look at how I talk about my own listeners, like in the comment section and stuff. Like, are you saying his listeners are idiots? Yes, I'm saying his listeners are my listeners are idiots. Like, look at the comment section on any one of the videos I've ever posted. That's a true generalization. It's not like every single one of you. Obviously, like I talk to a lot of you, off mic. Obviously, I respect you and everything, but like it's YouTube. Like, of course, the majority of your audience is kind of dumb. But yeah, it just seems like he's throwing red meat to those people. I don't want to say he doesn't mean what he's saying, but it's like it's just a mystery to me. It's a mystery to me how he could actually believe that Mormons are atheists. It's on its face stupid. And there are good arguments against it. But yeah, check out that video in Philosopher's Garb if you want to see like a 40-minute debunking. Yeah, what up, fellow idiots? Me hanging out with my idiots. I'm also an idiot, so we're in good company. But yeah, honestly, I mean, okay, everyone has left a comment they regret. Yes, it does happen, but like maybe it's just the subject matter. Maybe it's my subject matter in particular that it's like I attract like schizo people and like just morons who like don't realize that they're stupid. And it gets tedious. But it could always be worse. Have you ever seen the live chat on a Capturing Christianity stream, especially during like an episode about hell or demons or something? But yeah, I mean, come on, like everyone's listeners are made up of idiots. I don't know why he's pandering to them. I guess it just seems like it must be about like clicks and views and everything. But yeah, Mormons, believe it or not, believe in God. They are not atheists. Okay, now people are starting to comment on this. Okay, maybe we will do a reaction video to Mormons or atheists, as much as I don't really want to, because I feel like I'm taking the rage bait. Like I'm exactly as it was designed to do. It was a silly claim. It's overstated, not really defensible. Then a bunch of people get mad about it, and a bunch of hooting idiots cheer it on, and then you get a bunch of clicks and views and a bunch of revenue and everything. And I'm pretty sure this is like his full-time job now or something. So I get it, but this is why you got to be careful what you wish for. Like making content full time sounds fun. Like it would be fun, but then you've got to be really sensitive to like your audience. You've got to be willing to pander, and you've got to be willing to, maybe compromise on some things. And I'm glad I don't have to do that. Um, but it's just so tempting. It's like, oh, it'd be so fun to do this full time. Yes, it would be, but you might become someone who you don't like very much in the intervening years. Um, but anyway, if you have any other ideas for reaction video or anything for next week's stream, let me know in the comments. Leave a comment anyway to help with the algorithm. If you're not subscribed, smash that subscribe button. And yeah, I've been Emerson Green. I will see you guys later.